even at a macro level, could actually start to add value to the organisation. In my experience, it can't be sold as a solution. It must be a solution to an outcome or an objective. Make it clear when you're starting why you're doing it.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers, and we are getting close to episode 150. We've been going in this series now for almost 2 years or maybe even over 2 years. It's a bit hard to remember back exactly when we began, but almost 150 episodes now. And if you're just joining us for the first time, then I'd encourage you to go through the database of, or the list of other episodes there. I'm sure there's going to be other fantastic episodes for you to listen to as well. But in today's episode, I'm very excited. I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Ben Davidson. Now, Ben is a business process lead in government and has been very much been involved in helping organizations mature from a process perspective, understanding how do we do BPM effective, sustainably across the enterprise as opposed to, in little pockets and fragmented. So we're going to learn a lot in this episode. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel. Pleasure to be here and really excited to go through this conversation today.
Great. That's awesome. So maybe to kick off, tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in this whole world of business process management. Is it something that you were kind of formally trained and qualified in, or was there a bit of a journey leading to this point?
Yeah. So I guess this probably started for me when I was a kid. I was really interested in maps, bushwalking, doing all sorts of stuff like that. So I think I always had this inbuilt interest in maps, directions, getting somewhere efficiently, and it sort of carried through my engineering degree at uni. My sort of formal process journey started early on in the grad program role that I had as a business analyst, actually, and part of the modules of the certification, the training development was actually around process mapping, process design. So I think that really resonated with me, the skill set, the approach of how weaving process analysis, process design through a lot of my early business analyst roles sort of went by and sort of developed from there. So that was probably about 15 years ago. My roles over time have really sort of shifted more and more each role into that process management space to where I am today. So I'd say roughly around 15 years of sort of formal experience in process mapping, process design, process improvement work to sort of get me where I am today. So, as of now, it's absolutely a full-time sort of job and passion for me.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. And it's interesting. I feel like there's a certain type of person that this line of work, it just makes sense to them. And we've had other conversations where they would tell me how they, it's ever since they were a child, ever since they were a young person, they had this fascination with making things more efficient, more effective, whatever it might be. And a lot of people with a background in engineering as well, So I think there's a certain type of person that, when they wake up in the morning, they're mapping out their whole kind of morning routine and how can I make sure that I'm constantly improving. So I think that's good. So
yeah, spot on.
You've obviously would have seen a lot of different organizations over the 15 years adopt different, adopt BPM in different forms and different ways. What would you consider as to be the more or the most important aspects when implementing a successful business process management approach?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I guess I've worked in a lot of organisations where BPM has been part of the journey for a little while and then sort of faded away in terms of its sort of core organisational focus. And I think the thing that really stands out for me, particularly in my more recent roles, is that leadership commitment and that and the need for that to really be strong, consistent, unwavering, particularly in that early phase. So I've worked in a couple of places now where we've started with very low process maturity or what I would call ad hoc or unstructured process management in the organisation. And the key thing there has always been get your leadership, get your executive on board, make it clear when you're starting why you're doing it. What's the organisational purpose for implementing BPM? It must be a solution to a problem that the organisation has or a goal that the organisation has. If that's not clear, BPM won't succeed. And it has to then be sponsored and led really actively from an organisational level, particularly in that early phases or phase. I think there's a point where an organisation gets to that BPM becomes part of the core culture, and then it can live and breathe and thrive on its own. But it's certainly something early on that just you cannot live without that leadership commitment. If I talk just a little bit more then about BPM itself, in my experience, it can't be sold as a solution. It must be a solution to an outcome or an objective. If your focus, if your intent is to lead with, here's BPM, what are your problems? Again, you're going to run into those same sorts of barriers. And I've seen that play out in a few different places, and you can really disconnect BPM from where the business is trying to be. So being outcome focused, listening to where the organisation's at and what they need is really critical to sort of setting you up for success.
Yeah, great. Do you have any particularly sort of challenging or interesting projects that you've been involved in where you've come in that they've obviously had some specific goals and objectives, and whether it was a light bulb moment for the organisation, but you were able to support them in this BPM work and really kick some goals?
Yeah, I'll probably talk to one, as again, in the government context. I joined the role, and probably the first set of conversations we had were around the strategy and where they were heading. So they recently made a really significant shift towards customer-facing and operational excellence as kind of key strategic pillars. And within that was a real focus around enterprise-wide systems and processes, but there wasn't really a strong and common understanding of what that meant. So our first, I guess, foray into BPM in the organisation was looking at the organisation and process architecture and coming up with a framework, a process architecture that the organisation could resonate with. And that was a really interesting but intense type of conversation. Got a lot of really strong interest and debate at sort of management and exec level. The outcome of that, I guess, multiple things. One, it actually brought the whole organisation together to look at what do we do? What is it we actually do to produce the outcomes that we produce? So that was a fascinating conversation. Following on from that, there was a big reflection on what transformation programs are we actually running at the moment? How is our operating model structured? How is our organisation structured to deliver on those outcomes? So even from that initial phase of work, you could see the cogs ticking within leadership and within different programs are going, actually, there are opportunities here for us to align projects better, to look at how we connect products to cost. How do we look at our investment pipeline and those sorts of things? So even very early on and at a strategic level, you could start to see where BPM, even at a macro level, could actually start to add value to the organisation. And really that, I guess, in a way, was our ticket to the next phase of doing work. And then you jump into, okay, where do we take this from here? Let's look at process ownership. Let's look at process standards, architecture, tools. Let's look at a program of work to actually go and work with parts of the business to look at where there are opportunities for improvement, to baseline our processes, to build out new processes. So, so that's, I guess, was a really important journey that we went on and really sort of helped set the scene then through some early quick wins at strategic level to get buy-in to continue that journey.
Yeah, okay. So for those listening, step one, if they're just starting out on their BPM journey, is to understand what are those key strategic objectives, the ones that obviously the senior leaders are focusing on, and how can we support that and get some wins there before trying to bite off too much more than we can chew.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can very easily overpromise and underdeliver when you're a startup BPM capability. You look at an entire organization, if you try and tackle the whole thing in one go, you're not going to have the capacity to actually serve any of them particularly well. So I think there's definitely getting the foundations in place is really important.
Yeah.
And then working out a roadmap, a program that's actually achievable based on the capacity that you've got available. So certainly in the roles that I've been in, the appetite has been there, but not necessarily supported by, huge amounts of funding or those sorts of things. So we had to start slowly.
Yep.
Start with a fairly small core team, stand up some of the basics around the architecture, the standards, and step into a few areas. Have conversations with lots, but not promise the world.
Yeah.
Take your time, build the roadmap out, and scale over time.
Yeah. And what would you say generates the most sort of interest? Is it the transparency? Is it the ability to show compliance? Is it the governance side of things? Is it the analysis and improvement? Like obviously there's many different drivers for business process management. What would you say are the ones that garner the most attention in the short term?
I probably, in my experience, split it into two camps. So if I'm thinking about it from an operational sense and a customer-facing sense, their drive is often very heavily geared towards continuous improvement. How do I better serve the customer? How do I optimize my products, my offerings to my customers and actually deliver a better outcome and do that rapidly? So they're really pushing hard on the continuous improvement drive flavor. Less interested around compliance, less interested around some of the underpinning pieces. If I then contrast that with a lot of your corporate functions, enterprise services, finance, risk, security, their interest is obviously in about the overall system. What does it cost? How do we make sure it's secure? How do we mitigate risk? Those aspects. And it creates an interesting tension within the organisation, but bringing those two together and getting them in the same room, in the same conversation, you can actually start to see really, holistically how important it is to get the solid foundations in place so that you've got the ability and the frame of reference to then drive continuous improvement out of. And I think that's really where, for me, particularly recently, I've sort of pitched BPM within the role that I'm in at the moment is build the base, get the common language, that structure in place, and that really sets you up then to be able to drive that continuous improvement agenda.
Yeah, great. Most organizations would be, transforming digitally in some way, shape or form. How does BPM fit into this broad topic of digital transformation? Because there's many organizations out there that would be doing, lean or Six Sigma or agile or a robotic process automation or whatever approach it is. How does BPM fit into that overall approach, and what are organizations missing out on if they don't have the BPM piece of the puzzle?
I think the key thing there is actually ensuring that you've really understood the business, understood its objectives and potentially where its pain points are before you go and invest heavily in technology. There's some interesting articles that I'll often go back to. I think there's a Gartner one from about 2014, and it talks about the importance of simplifying, standardizing processes and eliminating waste before you go and invest heavily in technology. And I think the potential or the risk of not doing that beforehand often results in solutions being bought and implemented that either don't address the business need, so that they're not aligned, solutions that overlap each other in terms of functionality, So they end up clashing or not integrating particularly well and creating even more manual sort of workarounds. And ultimately then, as you move those into operation, not only have you left the business with an amount of sort of manual effort to try and integrate and join all those things together, but you've often left the organization with a really high operational cost for the technology itself. So, yeah, particularly where you've overlapped the functionality of multiple technologies. And I've seen that in a lot of places where you may have 3 or 4 different pieces of software that can actually achieve the same outcome, and you've never really considered how it actually needs to work end to end. So that to me is a real driver for why you would always take a process-driven approach, or at least ensuring the process BPM is actually there at the table when you're actually making some of those big strategic decisions about technology.
Yeah, great. Now process obviously interacts with every person interacts with processes, whether you're on the front, you're a frontline employee all the way up through to senior leadership, you're involved in a process in some way, shape, or form. There are many people, I guess, with different drivers, different motivators, different objectives in the organization. How do you bring everyone along the journey? And that's such a big question. And I'm sure that there are some people you need to prioritize over others in terms of, who are the most important? Who do we absolutely need to get along this journey? Otherwise, it's going to be a major roadblock or hurdle.
That's a very, very good and very big question, I guess. One consistent message doesn't necessarily work for all people. So I think you need to really understand the audience in that case. And a lot of it, if I'm talking to a senior leader or an operational staff, it's actually trying to understand how they see the world, what's in it for them, what's important for them, rather than going in necessarily and leading with, here we are with BPM and continuous improvement as a methodology, as a solution to all of your problems. A lot of that early conversation is about where are you from, what's your objectives, who are you as a person, as an individual, as a team, and trying to understand kind of where they're at. What are the things that are interesting to them? What are the things they're actually looking for? What you see from an operational staff member is going to be entirely different sometimes to what you see from senior leaders. Senior leaders, the words standardization, optimization, simplification, all of those things are going to stand out. Operational staff, they're going to be bugbears within the process itself. This thing bugs me, it's manual, it drives me nuts, it takes me, I have to rework this part of the process over and over and over again. So there are issues within their own processes, or often the processes they depend on from the rest of the organization aren't where they want them to be. You often hear that interplay between an operational staff member or manager saying, I really struggle with our hiring processes or our offboarding processes, and our HR teams will, in almost in reverse, will talk about how unclear the roles are for delivering our operational processes and how it's hard for them to develop leadership development programs and training and all of those sorts of things. So looking for those cues, I guess, is really important, and then being able to tie them back to an overall narrative to really connect those goals back to one sort of common connected objective. If I just add one more thing, from an organizational sort of top-down perspective, it certainly helps when you've got leaders that actually communicate their objectives down through the lines. If you're the messenger and you don't have that leadership commitment, back to my earlier point, it's really difficult to take a standardization message to a set of operational staff and actually have that resonate. It's got to come from their leadership team that they trust.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess having the environment or the culture where people feel they can bring their pain points and challenges and obstacles to the table, that's a good step one. That's a good place to be. You'd rather, I guess, be in that position where your frontline employees, the people at the coalface, do feel empowered to bring, because they're probably in the best position to identify what's working and what's not working. I think there are many organizations out there where you'll have the same people doing the same thing for many, many years, and nothing changes, and it becomes a very old and outdated and ineffective, inefficient process because no one's bothered to sort of highlight anything. But talk to us about how, because I'd imagine in some cases, yes, it is, you are removing pain from employees' day-to-day lives because of the, what you're doing through BPM. But for others, it's like, hang on a second, don't touch my thing, don't touch my baby. This is my area. This is what I do. And I know that, there's been, I know the whole topic of automation, when that gets brought up, it's like, hang on a second, what will I do then? Do I have no value? Do I no longer have any value to bring to the organization because we'll have a computer doing my job? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really interesting topic for me in this role, as I think you get a split probably between people who see the room for improvement and really want to go there, and they call out pain points. There's people, I think, somewhere in the middle that are maybe dismayed by the fact that they've overseen processes with pain points throughout their career and never really got buy-in and empowerment to actually change things and make it better. So
right.
They may be somewhere in the middle. And then there's probably a group that I think you're right, within this world of process automation and orchestration, there's fear, I guess, if you'd label it as anything, within people that I've seen, that they worry, my job at the moment is this is, I embody this type of role. And I'm not sure where the future is for me. If I've got technology now replacing activities that I do, what's my role going to be in the future? So I think BPM's got a really important role to play there, and something it really needs to consider as process automation comes up is actually how to deal with that, I guess, human displacement aspect. And, for me, if you look at, I guess, methodology like the Toyota production system methodology, it's really strong in shifting the mindset of its staff away from being the sort of on the tools, hands-on operators of the factory line into more of a quality control and continuous improvement mindset. So it's actually core to their responsibilities as they sort of shift more into that cycle of continuous improvement, that is really where their focus is. They hold the intelligence. They understand the process intricately. They're best placed to identify where things are going wrong or going wrong, and need to be empowered to make those improvements. And I think that's really something that organizations, I guess, can shift or bring forward in the culture as we transition more into an automated state, is actually empowering that improvement mindset.
Yeah, great. And talk to me about the difference between, I guess this the battle, or the I don't know what the word is, but between like your iterative micro improvements versus more radical innovation. I had a conversation a while back now in this series where the guest was talking about how a lot of organizations spend a lot of time focused on processes that have been around for years or even decades, and focusing on making very minuscule sort of micro improvements to an old process without fully radically transforming. There's a classic sort of an analogy where it's like, we didn't get the car by making horses run faster or something like that. How do you manage that tension between tweaking daily improvements versus we need to like gut this thing and redesign it from the ground up?
Oh, that's a really good one. I guess I'm not sure if this necessarily answers your question. For me, the thing that I'm sort of experiencing at the moment is exactly that. We've got parts of the organisation that are operationally tweaking and refining, whilst we've got major transformation occurring at the same time. I guess I'm looking at it at the moment in almost a change control sense. You have I think both can exist at the same time. They have to be positioned with the same common language. So for the two to work together, they have to be coming from the same foundation. This is where I think BPM has an important role to play. Is if we understand that we are two different, I guess, speeds of evolution, but we are connected through one process lens, then it gives us the opportunity to actually tackle both at the same time. So I can make 57 incremental improvements whilst we're developing that major jump forward. And I can do that in a way that's actually sequenced well on a clear roadmap. If I am unable to see that, if I can't actually see the fact that we're working on those two different things, they're likely to clash. So I'm not sure if that necessarily answers the question, but I think it's that common reference point that allows both to occur at the same time. Obviously, there are points where you need to slow down on the incremental improvements to allow the big change to come through. That's absolutely the case. But you can't stop incremental improvement in the 1 or 2 years it takes you to deliver the big thing. So I think in a way, I look at it similar to, say, how Apple develops the new iPhone models. They'll have, it's very, very clear what the product line is that they're working on, and they'll have the iPhone 11, 12, 13, what are we up to, 14? In the middle, they'll have a team working on incremental improvements and minor releases of iOS versions and minor increments on the phone. And they've got a team working on the bigger transformational jumps up to the next model. So it's working out as an organisation, how do you accommodate both the minor incremental stuff and the bigger transformational things without losing the connection between the two.
Yeah. And I guess that is a good example because the drivers for these major transformations would look different and would be driven or motivated differently, whether it's government or whether it's private or whether it's the nature of the business. I guess it often, our big banks, big telco, big insurance, in these industries have been disrupted by smaller, sort of more agile organizations that have really gone after a particular niche. They're probably not going to take down a bank, but they're going to focus on, well, where's the chink in the armor? Where is that part of our current financial system or something like that we can deliver something that's better? And then now these big banks are finding themselves in a position or big whatever where they're going to have to adapt and innovate because people are looking elsewhere, whereas maybe government, it's slightly different. Maybe it's driven more by regulations and things like that.
Yeah. I think you're right. There's a big challenge I think bigger organisations have is that agility, I guess, to pivot quickly and actually respond or even lead market changes. Whereas their sort of status quo is to move sort of slowly, have an established system. They've got large staff numbers, large customer base. It's harder to just turn left when you need to, rapidly on the spot like that. But I think that's where BPM again can help, right? If you've got the solid foundation in place that's there, you've actually built that ability to transform quickly.
Sure.
BPM, I think, that underpinning structure actually allows for that agility to come through in a stronger sort of higher cadence, continuous improvement sense. So that's where, I certainly look at that, having that foundation in place in terms of the the BPM frameworks, the architecture, and really importantly, the mindset and the empowerment to actually innovate, to improve, to shift where you need to shift as an organization, not just in terms of practitioners, but in terms of the organizational appetite and readiness for change. If the organization, particularly users, are familiar with controlled and continuous improvement, then each time you make an incremental change or a big change, I think they're more accommodating, they're more ready to receive. So it's not just about the people driving the change into the organization. It's actually about preparing the organization to run at that same cadence and to accept change at that same cadence. And I think they're things that BPM certainly helps. It's not a holistic solution above all others, but it's a really important piece of that mix.
And you would have seen, I guess, you would have seen BPM evolve over the years and the way it's kind of adopted and applied. I think that there's many different aspects of this space that are constantly improving. Obviously, probably the most noticeable one is the technology side of things, where you've got automation type technologies, and you've got no-code, low-code solutions now, obviously trying to mitigate the risk of not having, enough technical resources to be able to manage executions and automations. And then we've got process mining, which is becoming, or has been, quite a hot topic. It's I think a lot of places are talking about it. I don't know how many are actually using it and sort of seeing real tangible commercial value. I know there are, but I think there's certainly a whole lot more people talking about it rather than kind of effectively implementing it. What do you think the next 2, 3, 5 years looks like? Do you think it's going to be? I'll let you answer.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think I think organisations are going to continue to push into this space, and certainly. I guess I've seen this in the place that I'm looking at the moment. I read an article. I think it was a Boston Consulting article a little while ago, talking about service factories of the future and how organisations, I guess, are shifting towards having these sort of small reusable objects and being able to rapidly package together different process elements to deliver different outcomes. That really fascinated me, but I think what's interesting in that is organisations really need to have that underpinning structure clearly in place. And again, it's having solid processes, solid technology to be able to rapidly adapt and piece together products or services, particularly in the tech industry, that can quickly meet different needs of an organisation. So that to me sounded, I guess, looks fascinating in terms of how you can then take a really solid, mature organisation with mature processes and actually be able to quickly pivot and shift to new offerings and different bundles of services or microservices that you can offer. So for me, that's a really fascinating space to go into. The thing that is interesting for me is then the human aspect of it. How do you continue to bring the human buy-in, that humanity side along with the technology, so that people in organizations feel empowered, but also feel like they're keeping up with the technology and can actually actively bring their expertise and insight into really amplifying where that technology can take you. I think that's probably, I look at a lot of these technology solutions, there's so much more they can bring if you've got an entire organization behind them to actually go, hey, you know what? Not only can we do this, we can actually do this with it. Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see how those technologies sort of embed more through the organizations and the possibilities they bring. So it's a fascinating space.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think with like the, artificial intelligence, that's obviously been quite a hot topic the last month or so, couple of months since, ChatGPT kind of had its big big blow up, and everyone's been talking about this engine that you give it some prompts, you give it some you input something into it, and then it's going to go and spit something back out to you. But it'll be an interesting future to see how that's blended in with the process work that we're doing, where we actually have a system that artificially can generate, the most optimized or the best possible process. But I'm sure that's not too far ahead in the future. But Ben, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here in this conversation. I've certainly been gleaning a lot from this conversation, and I know our audience has as well. So I just want to thank you again for sitting down with me. For those that are listening to this episode, if you've enjoyed this episode or you've been following along for some time, we'd love for you to give us a rating or a review on any of the platforms that you're listening to this. So that would be much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch you in the next episode.